Boost Up crew is here, and we are going to be talking about renewal strategy and renewal forecasting. I am really excited for this, and I'll go ahead and get off camera and let you guys run with it.
All right, let's get into it. Share my screen here. Okay, perfect. So just to kick things off, I'll go first. My name is Lucas Lamb. I am the Director of Product and Solutions over here at BoostUp. And like Kemla kind of mentioned, we'll be talking about mastering renewal forecasting strategies for sustainable growth today. I'm really happy to join by Nick, who has a lot of experience in this space and is now leading a RevOps team. Nick, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Nick here. I am Vice President of Revenue Operations at CloudCall, and I am joining here, Lucas, to bring in the RevOps perspective on how to not only strategize around renewal forecasting, but also to how to properly implement it and tactically do it.
Perfect. So just a little bit background on BoostUp and who we are. Our goal here is to provide a revenue command center for revenue operations leaders, CROs, and the overall revenue-facing organization. And the way we do that is by scaling revenue performance efficiently. And that's by providing more reliable pipeline, improved rep productivity, and highly accurate forecasting. And the way we deliver that to our customers is by BoostUp process and automation and improving your day-to-day workflows with your revenue touchpoints, benchmarking and measuring different aspects of revenue and revenue processes with our RevAI insights, and then be able to measure things and measure what's going on within your business with our RevBI analytics part of the platform. And these components together provide that revenue command center for our customers. And our customers kind of vary very widely. We're working with scaled B2B SaaS companies, quick growing tech companies, and really trying to provide aspirational RevOps leaders with a way to deliver that vision down to the organization. How do I deploy pipeline management and get really accurate data flowing in the system? How do I enable my reps to be as efficient and effective as possible in their day-to-day workflows? And how do I then roll that up and provide accurate forecasting to my leadership team? And for today's conversation, we're really going to be focusing on the idea of renewals and renewal forecasting. And in my role, I'm often asked by our customers, hey, we've been doing sales forecasting for years now. We have a scaled sales team. And now that we've gotten all these amazing customers, we need to maintain them, grow them, and then we need to provide that forecast to our leadership team. It's a massive part of our revenue. It's actually the largest part of our revenue at this point. And we need to be able to manage that with the same rigor and the same processes that we've built out for the sales organization. So whenever I'm asked the question, hey, how do I do renewal forecasting? The first thing I ask, and first thing I get validation on is we're trying to understand what is expected to renew. And that includes your existing customers, your current contracts, and any expected growth you have from that base. So that's kind of the starting point here. We're talking about what's expected to renew and how we're going to grow that year over year. And there are a lot of problems that get in the way, right? If this was an easy thing, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. And these pillars here are going to feel very similar to probably what we've all addressed on the sales side. Unreliable data. We don't have good insights and processes into that renewal base. The hygiene and quality of that data set is also relatively poor. And then we're trying to then build a renewal strategy on top of that unreliable data. And then we're really having to do these analyses into our renewal deals the same way we're asking our sales team to provide those pipeline updates week in and week out. And then we have these reps now, and you may think, okay, well, renewals is CSMs or renewal managers. But if we're thinking of this from a revenue perspective, it's very similar to our sales reps. There's insights and processes around how they're touching their accounts day in and day out, how they're prioritizing which of their customers they're reaching out to and engaging with. And then as we grow our customer base and try to gain efficiency there, how are we scaling our team's activities for the most success? And then analyzing the effort and impact of what they're doing day in and day out. And then what that kind of boils up to is this lack of forecasting, the incomplete forecast call. And that really goes around missing out on insights and processes, not having that rigor in the forecast cadence. We're just kind of, a lot of customers are figuring that on the sales side. We need that same thing on the existing customer side. And how do we build confidence in the calls they're making and evaluate the health of those forecast inputs and outputs? So in the end, what that kind of gets summarized into is we need a renewal process. In the same way we have a pipeline management process, we need a renewal pipeline management process. And we need our reps to think strategically about their customers and how they are working with those customers and building out those playbooks. And then we need accurate forecasting. If we can have a renewal process, our reps can be strategic. In theory, we should be able to have accurate forecasts. So for today's conversation, I'm kind of rolling that up into two main buckets, the idea of pipeline and the idea of forecasting. So the first thing you always need to get right, though, is that base renewal opportunity record. What is in our CRM? And when I'm asked about renewal forecasting, we often skip ahead to like, okay, you're making a call, you're doing the work, but what we often forget is you have to build that core data point to begin with that everything stems from. So I just kind of express it as, hey, a renewal opportunity record is the same as a sales opportunity, just a little bit different, right? And the core questions we're asking there is, what is the renewal amount? When is the renewal date? And where is the renewal stage at? And the amount is really the prior amount based on the existing contract. The date is the current contract end date based on whatever your current terms are. And that stage is the renewal stage based on your org's renewal process steps. So that's the difference there, right? When we're thinking about this, there's the existing customer that we're starting with. We have that good starting point to work from. And then now we're putting on that classic lens of the sales process on top of that. So we really start breaking down those different components, right? Again, the amount is the prior amount based on the existing contract. So you have that component. And then you would have the forecast renewal amount. Here's what happened in the past. Here's what I think is going to happen in the future. And a part of that is going to be the growth amount. Then you're going to have the date, right? You're going to have your current contract end date. And then what you want your renewals team doing is managing an expected close date. You're not always going to renew perfectly, right? There may be contracts that renew early, some that renew late, and you're trying to measure, okay, we had 10 renewals that were supposed to be in this quarter. We actually renewed 9 of them on time, and then one of them happened to be late and fell into the next quarter. And from a process perspective, the stage is really the renewal stage, and you're going to define this process based on what makes the most sense for your organization. I personally recommend trying to keep them the same as your sales stages. That just creates more consistency and cohesiveness in the organization. And the same thing with your forecast categories. If we're thinking about process versus forecasting, right, the stages are what step we are at in the renewal process. The forecast category is telling us the likelihood of a positive outcome. Can I commit to this renewal coming in? Or is this more of a best case where things need to go better than average for me to actually secure this renewal? Now, the other part to this is anything else pertaining to renewal pipeline and forecasting. There's a few more things that go into customer relationship management that are really important when thinking about managing your renewal pipeline and assembling that renewal forecast. So when we think of actually creating the opportunity record and what it's going to look like, here's a quick wireframe of what I most commonly see out there. You're going to have your owners, Casey Smith in this case, sitting in our US West mid-market team. We're going to have a stage. We're currently negotiating this renewal. And my forecast opinion is that it's a best case shot, right? I'm not guaranteeing it. I can't commit it to you yet, but I think if everything goes well, this will potentially come in. And it was a $50K contract. I'm forecasting it for $75K, meaning there's a $25,000 growth happening on this contract. However, the current end date was supposed to be in May. I don't think it's going to come until June, right? So it's going to be a late slip within our pipeline and within our forecast. Now, the big part here, and Nick, this is where I'll lean on you a little bit, right? Is there's all these additional attributes that come in. You have engagement scoring. Is the customer communicating with us? The really big one on the customer success side is that health score, be it general relationship, product success. And then because we're thinking about managing a pipeline and a forecast strategically, the idea of next steps or MEDPIC. And then because we're also dealing with contracts here, any products or quotes. And Nick, I know you have some really interesting insights on how organizations can think about building out these additional attributes to treat in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, what would be interesting to just always kind of reiterate, right? Because you've done that already, is to make sure that the concept of forecasting is understood to be exactly the same between new business and renewals, right? They don't actually change. What changes is just the methodology and the way about going in, right? And how you do it and the things you consider for the renewal to happen or not. But essentially, the act itself is very much the same. Now, what would also be interesting to just give an idea of what you would say an ideal state of an account within a CRM would look like is you would have at any given point in time one new business, one deal, right? Opportunity close towards an account. And then you would have your subsequent renewals, right? And then once you have those renewals created, you then obviously would potentially have upsells that would be tied into those renewals. And by having a copy of the previous renewal onto the next renewal, you will always be able to copy in the previous one amount into a baseline flat value, right, field, which would be your prior amount. And when you close the renewal, you will then be able to compare whatever you close the renewal for against that prior amount. And you can start then driving all of your reporting, all your dashboards, and basically your entire forecasting strategy. And with the upsells, you can use flows inside Salesforce or pretty much any CRM to then drive in the lookup of which renewal is the most recent one, attach it to the upsell, and the upsell will then be able to tell what renewal it needs to roll the values in or reduce or subtract from, depending on how the organization goes. You do upsells or downsell opportunities to add or subtract. But then essentially, you don't necessarily need CPQ or massive overhaul of your tech stack to be able to get a lot of that done. You can do a lot of it manually for organizations that don't really have a lot of budget for the tech stack, which is very common in 2023. You can get creative and actually do a lot of this manually yourselves. And with this, you can then start driving a lot of the reporting. And a basic, I think, idea around reporting would be your kind of regions or your segmentations, and then have an idea of like total revenue, total renewals, open renewals, whatever you've won or lost. And then you can do a basic percentage on count, volume, and value so that you can have an idea about what's going on at any given point in time. And with this model, that's pretty much how you drive it. But to add on to that, you would then have things like engagement scores, right? Or sentiment scores from CSMs, which drive a lot, or should at least drive a lot of the discussions. And for that to be successful, you need to have a framework, which I'm happy to share with the team an idea of what a good framework would look like. Obviously, you have to adapt that for every business, but once you have a defined framework of what a sentiment score could look like, you can then start grading customers on a kind of standardized basis, and then you can start adding or reducing points from the health score, adding on to the usage and adoption, which gives you a much more clearer picture of the state of your customers.
We have an interesting and, in my experience, difficult question for you all. What methodology would be the best for usage-based products when forecasting happens month to month or quarter to quarter? It's a tough one.
Yeah. I think the month on month, you would have to understand, I think, the features that you're after, right? So what usually changes is the time frame that you actually track some things and what exactly is important for your customers. So that usually helps by segmenting customers and then segmenting actions by those customers, because larger customers might behave differently or might have different usages for specific features, X, Y, and Z. So then you would be able to start bucketing them by usage. And usually on a month-to-month basis, you have to have a shorter time frame in which you track these things. So that is usually the difference. So if you usually in enterprise, you see usage windows of 30, maybe 60 days, depending on what you're tracking. And month-on-month businesses is usually 1 to 2 days, depending on how it is, right? And depending on the volume of activities.
And just to add on that, with the usage-based side, there's usually some adjustments or assumptions that you want to apply to that historical usage to generate that forecast. And that's really going to be a bit of your own personal opinion as a leader, as a RevOps org. Hey, given the way my product is used and consumed, we're heading into a time of year where I know usage usually drops off or increases. And if you're more mature, then you may be able to say, and given that usage of product A is known to drop off, we may want to deploy a strategy to add on another part of our portfolio to compensate for that decrease in revenue. So I think with the usage-based side, the first step is what Nick kind of talked about there, is the segmentation and understanding how your product is used to the customers. And then once you have a good understanding of that, when you're looking forward into the future, being able to take those, I kind of describe them as those month-over-month rates of usage, and be able to apply some type of adjustment or judgment to that to then generate a forecast, a forward-looking perspective. But I think most people kind of skip to that first without really understanding how is our product used month over month, and then given how it's used historically, what are those trends that we can expect going into the future?
Love the call out for seasonality. That's really smart. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then the other thing I think that's worthy to call out here, that's really coming from the new business side that I've seen a lot of customers be very successful with when doing a renewal strategy, is taking those two classic things of next steps and the idea of MEDPIC, whatever kind of sales process strategy you like, and deploying that into the renewals organization. Most people are very good at, getting a vendor to provide them with that engagement or sentiment score based on conversations, or enabling their team to provide that to them, mixing that in with some product utilization data from whatever is tracking that. And then if we can have the team start thinking very strategically about the contract paper process for that renewal, that really helps build that confidence in your renewal pipeline and the renewal forecast. If you think about a lot of our customers right now are planning their budget going into the next fiscal year. And as I'm looking at my renewal base, I want my team thinking about things like, what metrics do they care about, and are we tracking towards that? Have we identified that economic buyer within the organization? Because that may be someone very different than who we initially sold to 3, 6, 9 months ago. And we're going to be trying to track that through our QBRs, through our engagement. When we're generating that renewal forecast, I need to know we've identified the decision maker, we've identified the economic buyer, I know what their paper process is, and really kind of bringing those strong principles we have for new business into the renewal side of things. And it may not just be a copy and paste of MEDPIC, but it's just having that thought process of, this is a contract, this is a negotiation, I need to know who my stakeholders are. And again, because we have that entire year in a classic contract to work with that customer, those people could be changing, right? Organizations are constantly restructuring, people are coming and going. And as our renewals team focusing and tracking towards that to guarantee when it's time to sign, I know who I'm going to be working with. I have that buying team identified with my customers.
Yeah. And I think also a model that I've worked with in the past, which is a version of MEDPIC, which at the end of the day is just a mentality, right? Is the constant check-in with your customers to see if their goals are still aligned, your goals for them are still aligned with their own. Because as you said, it changes significantly, even throughout 6 months, depending on the company. Is the customer journey plan, right? You actually build from the point of signing a contract, understanding what exactly it is that they want to achieve, right? That needs to be done with new business or the sales team in conjunction with either SEs as well, and also AMs and CSMs to design a plan of action that needs to be done, or at least a target of what should ideally be done in that account to show success and mark that as a success plan. And so you can hold yourself accountable to actually get that done, but also your customer, you cannot keep cycling through whatever objectives it is. So you keep it really straightforward, targeted, and a very strategic approach to it. Otherwise, it's always a moving target, right? And that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way I've really seen this come to life for a lot of customers is we've built CS teams that are very good at driving product usage, overall customer happiness with the base. And now we're layering on another piece to that. You know how to get them to use your product and implement it. You know what it takes for them to be successful and happy with you and supported throughout that engagement cycle. Now we need you to start thinking about how to maintain those relationships to guarantee that revenue, to qualify that revenue year over year. This isn't, in the past where you could rely on the new business side to cover all of your targets and goals as a company. You've actually kind of really brought in a majority of your customer base, and you need to maintain and grow them. And that really falls to our CS and renewals teams to think more like salespeople in a sense, but with maintaining that customer focus and that customer orientation. So it is a new breed that we're trying to kind of create here, where it's not just, hey, make them happy and they'll renew. It's make them happy and be strategic and work with them collaboratively in the same way we're asking our sales team to do that with new business deals. Awesome. So that's a starting point, right? We have our team now. We have the automation, creating the renewal records. We have our teams thinking strategically about them and getting the accurate data points onto the op record. And what does it start to look as we start rolling it up across the organization, moving from that single customer, that single op record, and now kind of formulating that for the org. And as we start looking at that, right, the way I often think about it is we need a renewal pipeline. And that's your existing renewal base, the idea of what should renew. And the goal there is to really improve your renewal rigor and introduce the idea of deal review discipline on your one-on-ones. We usually talk about customer health and success. Let's now start thinking about the deal aspect as well. And there's three main pillars that falls into. There's going to be the process and automation, and really trying to create those renewal process and opportunity workflows, where you're deploying deal management and renewal pipeline inspection across the entire hierarchy. And that goes to a lot of what our sales team has been doing, adding and updating renewal process information. You need a seamless and scalable way to capture that data. And then for your day-to-day customer communications, how do you explore those conversations, understand the conversational sentiment going on between your CS team and your stakeholders? And then for larger organizations where you may have regional CS teams, a wider base, the ability to quickly and easily inspect what those open renewals are across the hierarchy, and then strategize for a reliable renewal pipeline. On the new business side, we're always trying to understand pipeline coverage and pipeline creation. Those aren't ones-to-ones on the renewal side, but those are those kind of characteristics of pipeline that we need to understand. What does a healthy renewal pipeline look like? And are we tracking toward that? And that's where the analytics side comes in, where you often need some kind of renewal management dashboard, where you can basically benchmark and measure renewal performance on demand. It's very simply what's open and expected to close. That's a starting point, right? That's that simple question we need to answer. And then, given what we have historically, you need to understand your renewal conversion rates. Usually we have a 90% retention rate or conversion rate, or we're always over 100, and we're always growing, and we want to track towards that. And then to make sure you are tracking towards that, then benchmarking successful renewal behaviors. We know that we need to have QBRs every 3 months or maybe every month for a successful renewal outcome. And then compare that over time, right? In the same way we look at the mix of our new business pipeline, we need to look at the mix and the composition of our renewal pipeline as well. And then to really kind of support that and improve the outcomes here, that's really where the idea of like revenue AI insights come in, to understand your renewal health and pacing, to proactively identify and mitigate your renewal risks. And that's where having really good clarity into customer engagement and sentiment, not just taking the word from your CS team, but having a tool come in and provide that overlay of insights for you. And then as the team is starting to actually manage their renewal pipeline week in and week out, some kind of summarization of renewal trends and changes. I can see renewals getting pushed out of the quarter and starting to slip, or is the trend of growth decreasing or increasing month over month? And on the pipeline side, understanding your renewal pipeline risk and health scoring, maybe taking those health scores, those customer success scores, leveraging that in the same way we would probability on the new business side to understand how the health of our renewal pipeline is pacing. And then creating goals around that. And once you have goals, you can understand pacing towards goals and see how you're trending. And that gives you a really actionable playbook to manage that renewal pipeline. And if we were to say, okay, we've done all this, what would it look like? If you want to create a dashboard, you would potentially have something to view like this, right? Where you'd understand how many renewals have I closed so far for the quarter? How many of my open renewals are committed to me versus pending? So in this case, I have 3.4 that I've closed, another 3.5 that's still open, but only about 1.3 million is actually committed to me by my renewals team. We still have $2 million of renewals just pending and sitting out there, where I don't have confidence in how that renewal pipeline is trending. We've already churned $500,000 here, and this is sitting on a renewal cohort of $7.4 million. And that last piece of the renewal cohort is kind of the unique baseline that we have in the world of renewals, where we know what is supposed to happen this quarter based on all the contracts we have sitting here. And then I'm kind of building a renewal pipeline against that initial 7.4 million. And that gives me all the numbers to the left. So that's the very high level starting point. That's probably where a lot of you are at in just tracking what renewals you have. Are they still open? Have they churned or have they closed? And then we want to layer on that idea of our CS team telling us, I'm committing to this renewal coming in, or it's still pending and it's more in that best case pipeline swing category. And then if you're doing that health scoring, creating some kind of renewals pulse. So I can see in the bottom left there that about 50% of my renewal base that's still open is relatively satisfied, right? And in this model here, satisfied means health is all good. There's some risk there, a little less than the next half. And there's that small high risk portion. So if I'm trying to triage, okay, where do I need to spend my time? Where do I need to do some deeper inspection into my renewal pipeline? Well, you're obviously going to start with that high risk bucket. That's where you can have the most impact and effect in the organization. And then you start working backwards from there. And that's, again, where a lot of organizations are at, where they can say, here's what's open, here's what's healthy or unhealthy. And as you build these processes and start benchmarking them, then you can actually introduce the idea of a renewal process hygiene, right? How many late renewals do we have? If I'm looking at deploying a sales process, are my CS teams not updating their next steps, not telling me their thought process and strategy, how they're going to secure this renewal? Are there no meetings coming up? Is there no engagement where they're not responding to me? Or maybe you have a tool coming in providing you an additional risk score to tell you, yeah, that's satisfied of 3.4 mil or of half of that, right? Well, BoostUp's telling you have 1.8 mil at risk. And what's that discrepancy from what the AI is telling you versus what your CS team is telling you? And using that, you can start triangulating on what parts of my renewal pipeline are healthy versus unhealthy, and generating that idea of a reliable renewal pipeline. And then after you have a pipeline build, then we get into the idea of forecasting. And a lot of people think, okay, well, if I can just track my renewals, then I can generate a forecast. But the difference here is we're starting to think about that week in and week out call of where we think we're going to end up. What am I expecting to renew, right? And this is all about getting alignment and confidence on your existing revenue and what that outcome is going to be. So the first thing here is building that renewal forecasting workflow. And that's all about having a scaled and accurate forecast assembly, submission, and review process. And that starts with having a hierarchical view into your forecastable renewals. And then as your team is actually providing that input, tracking those forecast deltas and understanding what is changing, what renewals are coming in and out of the forecast in contrast to the sales process. And then as much as you can, automating that assembly. If you have a wide customer base, maybe your CSMs are managing 50 to 100 accounts, right? You may need to automate more of that assembly for them to get that accurate forecast. And then to make sure they actually do it, introducing some kind of scheduling and alerting to enforce that forecasting rigor. The big one here, I think more so, is the analytics, where we need to understand what is good forecasting performance. And in the same way we measure forecast accuracy for new business, we need to start measuring forecast accuracy on our renewal side. And there's two aspects to that. There's the forecast accuracy of their calls. They have a book of business that's worth 50K, and they think they're going to secure 45K. And how close are they to that number week in and week out? And then the actual deals or accounts that are going to renew or not. Sure, they may have the final number wrong, and that's due to some contract changes right at the end, but at least they knew these 9 out of 10 customers were going to renew, and they got that count of renewals correct. So this is the difference between what number do I think I'm going to end up at versus what deals are going to get me there. And these two data points are really important in tracking and managing and analyzing to understand, does my renewals team know what is happening in the base? And you can provide some really powerful coaching when you're actually managing and tracking towards that. And then the big one is calculating your expected and actual renewal rates. That's what every renewal leader needs to output in the end. And then also measuring that forecast process adherence. It's great to tell them to do stuff, but if we're not measuring how well they're doing and if they actually are, then it's a lot of wasted effort. And then to support that, the idea of layering on those AI insights to, again, proactively identify and mitigate risk in the forecast and provide extra confidence there. I often describe it as triangulation. We have the analytics from the reporting side, we have the input from the rep, and can we provide a third piece to that puzzle using all the great AI insights that are out there today? And this is where you can start identifying unexpected deal outcomes in the forecast. They're saying it's going to close. My AI is telling me actually it's going to slip out of the quarter, or this renewal is going to be lost. And then measuring that across the hierarchy to assemble that third data point. Maybe even measuring projections. Given the book of business they have, what their historical renewal rate has been, here's where we think they're going to end. And again, this is that third piece of the puzzle, that aspect of triangulation, to be able to build a robust renewal forecast that you have a lot of confidence in. So just to kind of show what that could look like, and this is a very simplified version here, right? Let's say you're doing renewal forecasting in BoostUp, and you would have the idea of my commit for the quarter is 5.3 million, and that's coming on 600K of expansion, giving me a total committed forecast of about $6 million. And that's what I'm guaranteeing to the organization. And if I guarantee that, we can expect a GRR of 64% or an NRR of 74%. And I can track and manage that month over month, week over week. On the best case side, giving some swing, some hedging for my organization, I actually think we may get $6.6 million. Everything goes great. We pull in some renewals I don't think are going to happen. Here's where we could end up. We get a little bit more expansion, giving us a $7.3 million best case forecast. Again, the same kind of terminology we may be using on the new business side, and now applying that to renewals. And if we get that outcome, then we can expect an 82% GRR and a 92% NRR. And again, now that you're capturing these inputs, you can track them over time, compare where you are in week 10 of this quarter compared to week 10 in previous quarters, and understand that renewal forecasting and pacing. And then because we have that extra layer of renewal risk, customer sentiment, we can then start slicing this forecast by those risk categories. Well, for all the deals that they're committing to me, the majority look like they're satisfied. And there is just a smaller portion that has some risk to it. As a leader, this would give me more confidence in the forecast call that I'm seeing. And then in the best case bucket, I see that satisfied. I see that there's some risk. And I also see that my team is including some high risk deals. So that high risk portion there, right, is where I can go inspect and say, okay, that's that swing of about $1.3 million between commit and best case. What are those deals? Can I deploy a solutions consultant to help the CSM guarantee that comes in with some great demos, some extra implementation and services to get them over the line? Or does this need executive air coverage? And I need to pull some strings and talk to their leaders to guarantee the renewal. I'm now identifying that subset of my renewal that gives me that extra swing that may help me cover my target. And this is where we see a lot of our customers moving towards. They've already identified these workflows, this forecast cadence on the new business side. Let's now do it on the renewal side. It's a very important part of our revenue. And I always want to identify in my forecast, where is there risk that my team is identifying, or maybe my team is unable to identify that my AI insights are providing to me. And then if we want to kind of just summarize all this up into one simple view, right? The idea here is to provide a reliable renewal pipeline, improve rep productivity, and accurate renewal forecasts. And if you want to say, okay, let me go to my CRO, let me go to my sales and renewals team and tell them what are the outcomes we're trying to push for, screenshot this page, send it over to them. This is the idea of, hey, if we can build out a renewal pipeline and forecast process, these are the outcomes that we should be looking to achieve by doing that and putting in that effort. And if we can do that, then we will have, again, that reliable renewal pipeline. We can improve our rep productivity, which is a very expensive part of the renewals organization. And then in the end, have those accurate renewal forecasts. And if we can get to accuracy, that will improve our planning, our strategy, and our spend going into the future, which at this point for most organizations is the main thing that they're trying to manage towards, especially as we head into the back half of this fiscal year. So that's, again, just kind of the general overview of renewal forecasting. What I would really recommend as you guys think about this and going forward into the rest of the year is, how do I build that what's expected to renew forecast? And then that what should renew pipeline? And what are the measurements, the processes, and the insights I need to make that successful and enable that across my organization? Nick, anything to add?
No, I think from my side, it makes a lot of sense. What would be interesting to always, as you progress through forecasting and the organization gets a bit more mature and understands a bit more kind of the pace in which they take things, it is always interesting to also look at the reasons why you're losing customers. It's always important to iterate on that and kind of focus a lot on the reasons why you're potentially doing that, because that usually has a lot of indication around things that you can make better and also focus on to actually be able to bring that accuracy even higher, right? And driving that NRR and making sure that not only the customers are happy, but that we are actually a bit more on point around the accuracy itself, right? So loss reasons are also important to drive the mindset change for forecasting itself.
Saw a really interesting stat on that recently where 85% of sales provided loss reasons are actually not what the customer says. So totally encourage rep ops to get really involved in that process and do some customer interviews if at all possible. It's a great way to gain some street cred in your organization. Had a couple questions for you all, if that's okay. I don't want to be interrupting anything. Am I interrupting?
Go ahead.
Great. So Nicholas, I would love to hear a few common missteps you see pretty often when people are using homegrown tech for these forecasts. Love to throw one out there as an example. A lot of people auto-populate renewals right after the initial sale, and getting the time in stage or stalled deal stats to automate can be a little tricky. Would love to hear other things you've seen.
I think automations are always a double-edged sword, right? You really need to know what you're doing. And also to the point of using historical numbers can give you a ballpark idea of where you should land at. It doesn't give you this full story, right? So what I would usually use the renewal records for is as a frame of reference and a place for the CSMs to always kind of put all the notes down and really just take all the information that is required from that customer's perspective and just put it there. The dates and the values and all that can be automated because the values shouldn't fluctuate unless you have upsells or downsells. They should remain the same. So there are a lot of things that you can automate, but the main difference between a renewal and a new business deal is A new business, you never necessarily know when it's going to close, right? The date can change, it can be pushed and pulled and a lot of that. But the renewals, they have a date, right? It's going to end. That contract is going to end on that specific date, unless you obviously do an early renewal or you push back. That's fine, obviously, but the date is set. So a lot of that you can control, but the qualitative side of things you can't really, right? The dates, and there's a difference between close date and the contract end date. Yeah, there is. For some organizations, it's not the same, but I think you should treat the quantitative side in an automated fashion as much as possible. But the qualitative side, you just can't, right? That's the purpose of the renewal and all the work that Lucas also kind of alluded to. You can't automate that.
And I was curious if you have any benchmarks or, a standard goal for people to shoot for when it comes to forecast accuracy. I know you're talking about the importance of measuring that. What do you generally see out there, people aiming for?
From a numbers perspective, it's really tough to say. I think you always have to aim at 100% NRR. That's basic, right? But that's just meaning that you're maintaining all your customers. You're not actually doing any proactive work and increasing the contract value or just upsell, cross-sell, anything like that. So there are different organizations that say that world-class is 125%. That's pretty high. For some organizations, that's unattainable. But for some, that's actually low, depending on if it's a high volume or high margin business. It does vary a lot. But to drive the actual accuracy, it's a mindset. You need to really teach people the value of forecasting and why you're doing it. Otherwise, you cannot really drive that motion, right? Because what is the difference between a best case and a commit? You need to really understand that best case means that it's actually what it says. It's best case. It's not guaranteed, but it's something that might be able to close. And you need to really understand what that actually means in real life to then say, this is best case. And the difference between that and commit is I can actually, cut a finger that it will actually close. Would you do that for best case? Well, not really. Then it's not commit. So it's these little simple tricks that actually help you understand and kind of put that frame of reference in.
And one thing to add to that, with your win-loss reporting and analysis on your renewal base is if you are doing forecasting on your renewals and then you are reviewing what did we win and lose, understanding, okay, the ones that we lost, did we know they were actually going to be lost? Were we projecting that early and often in the quarter? And it often becomes less about, the NRR number is what you're reporting out to the board for senior leadership. It's very hard to sometimes bring that down to the individual contributors who are managing that revenue. And for them, they're thinking about the logos, the individual account names and the people that they work with. So you need to find that tie between, hey, here's what leadership cares about, which really you may not fully understand and don't have a full input or impact on, but here's your piece of that puzzle and how well and how accurate you performed against it. And that's where it goes to not just tracking the amount of the forecast, the aggregate NRR on the contract side, but the individual accounts that they thought would end up in a certain state and how well they're managing towards that.
Yeah, and a lot of this falls on the manager too, understanding how optimistic and pessimistic people are. We have a question from Peter. In a company that has an AM or account manager responsible for the customer's renewal and a CSM responsible for the customer success using product, what should be the role of the CSM in the forecast process?
This is always a fun one. I have a few customers that I work with that have this set up. And I think that's where you can really start getting more triangulating data points for the success and outcome of that forecast. CS should be able to give you a really, really accurate data point around how happy they are, how well they're using the product. And then that renewals manager is given almost more freedom and ability to strategize on how to use that in the actual contracting renewal process. So again, it's just being able to work more as a team, and that idea of a team-based sale. I'd equate it to having an SE or an SC paired with your AE on the new business side. And the existing customer side, you now have the CSM who knows the product, knows what they're doing, and can kind of provide that customer-orientated roadmap and solution. And then the renewals manager can focus more on the individual buyers. And for a lot of people, what they're realizing is the people that use our product, that talk to us day in and day out, are not the ones that are actually going to determine if we renew or not, right? Our users and our day-to-day admins don't actually own the budget. So you do need that renewals manager focusing on that part of the relationship, identifying the economic buyers, identifying the decision makers, maintaining those relationships in parallel with your CSM team, driving success and usage for the actual product.
Which happens a lot with RevOps as well, right? Most of the time, all the tools that we usually get for the business, we don't actually use them on a day-to-day basis, right? And the people who actually do, they don't hold the budget to use it, to actually get it, right? So that's the same approach.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question from Sarah. Her company loves to agree to annual and multi-year renewals with customers. They also have customers with quarterly renewals. They're still striving for strategic engagement with these customers. Do you recommend a different cadence or approach to QBRs between the annual and quarterly agreement customers?
Yeah, I think
it's a hard one.
Yeah, I think that could be set from the inception, right? I think depending on what it is that you're trying to categorize as success for the customer, that is what's going to drive the motion in which you do QBRs. Some companies that are massive deals, they don't need 3 QBRs a year, or they just need sometimes one. It depends a lot on the motion that you set at the very beginning. Like depending, for example, my current company, I already used the customer development platform, customer data platform that we had in previous companies. So I got it, and I got it with a specific objective in mind. I deployed it, and what happens is the use case that we had initially got changed throughout whatever the cycle of the implementation. And right now, the success that they're seeing is not the success that I'm actually reporting, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the implementation was unsuccessful. It's just that I knew exactly why I needed the platform. It's got deployed and done, and now I'm moving on into doing different things. So it's really tough to actually pinpoint, but I still think regardless of what it is, if it's a conversation, a meeting for an hour, a year, you need to constantly kind of check in and make sure that your customers are not only using the platform, it's not a usage basis, it's just, are they getting the value that they want and need?
I've also seen some really smart applications of product analytics here, especially for the annual customers, whereas with the quarterly, you kind of were forced into interacting on a more consistent basis. With the annual, looking at usage analytics and key benchmarks to elevate when you need to have an engagement with them. Sometimes it's a little too late, but it can help the organization prioritize when they're having a meeting. Lucas, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's where having that hybrid team of renewals managers focus on the relationship versus CSMs focusing on product adoption and delivery really becomes beneficial for orgs. If you are signing, we're doing 2-3 year contracts, the product side, you're going to have to build tooling to understand adoption and usage, and your CSM is going to own that.
Yep.
And you are definitely going to need a renewals manager tracking that buying team, because I guarantee in 3 years, it's going to be totally different stakeholders, and you're going to lose sight of that. So sure, the sales team loves that. I can sign the 3-year contract, it's guaranteed, I'm happy. But then what they're throwing over the fence, and I often ask my sales team, okay, what are we going to be doing over the next 1, 2, 3 years to collaborate with their decision makers and stakeholders? And this is often where sales can help out that renewals team in understanding, here's how you use LinkedIn to track your buying team and drive that engagement, right? Here's how we actually may deploy a cadence tool to constantly enrich and nurture them, not with just like, hey, checking in on product usage, but more thought leadership or wider, perspectives on what you're offering to them. So if you do go that path, right, maybe less of a usage or PLG motion, more of that classic, multi-year contract motion, I would recommend thinking about splitting out the day-to-day success versus the overall renewal engagement and management.
On that note, we have a question. They have a team specific to renewals, and the CSM is not part of the renewal cycle. How do I get the right forecasting?
I think the first step is bringing the CSM into that. And I think there's Get them involved. And I think what I've seen, CSM, if you think about it, is a role in organization that's relatively new compared to your sales team. We've been doing sales for 60, 70 years in tech, you could argue, right? But CS is a relatively new org, and the people that were hired for that were not classically revenue focused. They were success focused. We hired them for a different reason. So they're becoming very comfortable and confident in that workflow. And if you want to start up leveling your team, this is a great way to do that. Have your CSM start thinking about not just success, but also revenue and renewals. And a great way to do that is say, hey, you're going to be part of the QBRs. You're going to be part of the renewal process. You're not providing the number for us, but you're providing that check and balance. And that's again where I equate it to what the AE and SC do on the pre-sale side. The SC is often not making a call, but they're often validating what the AE is saying. I think this deal is going to close. SC says, nope, I've been on every single demo call, every single solution call. There's no way it's happening. You can do that same thing with your renewals and your CS team.
And there's a great parallel actually between RevOps and usually BI, right? BI is usually mixed up with the same team, as in BI is the same thing as RevOps, but actually it isn't, right? The BI team, they provide the tactical, technical kind of data inputs, and RevOps are usually more attached to the business side, so we can give the color into the data, right? Because the data itself sometimes just doesn't tell the story, but RevOps can put that story using the data. So one doesn't really exist without the other. And I think that's the motion that needs to get into everybody's heads around sales and SEs and CSMs and renewal managers, or the renewal cadence.
Great points. It might be interesting to provide people just a little bit of context, Lucas, probably particularly in your court, with going into board meetings and that NRR and how critical it can be. Can you give us a little additional context there?
It's what everyone's tracking towards, right? Especially in those executive meetings, they just want, hey, give me that one number that I can go to the bank with, right? And to Nick's point, that's where the color commentary really needs to come in. So yeah, you want to calculate the number, and you can argue you calculate based off of amount or just net retention of your base, right? And you probably need to do both or a mixture of both. But then providing that story around that, what has gone into that number? How are we tracking towards that compared to the past? And also, what has changed in our customer base, in the market, and in our organization that may be impacting that? Yeah, I'm telling you, we're going to do 120%. And here's what we did and why that's giving us that great number. Or maybe we're 80% and we're not going to hit what we're expecting. But here's the reason, that is maybe not positive, but the color commentary, the explanation around it. And this is where, RevOps is really playing that unique role, because it's a collaboration now between marketing, sales, and customer success. And because your customer base is the largest part of your revenue for most companies at this point, right? That's where the focus needs to be. And one thing I've also seen come to fruition there is when you can start with that side of it, it feeds back into sales and marketing more so, and drives that new business pipeline in a much more healthy way. When you really understand how that retention is persisting in the customer base. Having worked on the sales side as well, I've always joked about, hey, what are you throwing over the fence? What are you throwing over the fence to the post-sales team, to the CS team? And we often don't give that feedback back to sales and marketing. And if we start creating that cycle, right, you talk about the bow tie funnel and what that looks like. Well, the key second half to that is everything in your customer base. And I think the executive level really needs to start changing their mindset. And I think they are, obviously, but that needs to be the upfront focus, because again, that's where the bulk of the revenue sits. And that's where you're going to really see growth year over year at this point.
Absolutely. Especially right now when people are emphasizing renewals, upsells as a way to stabilize their business if they're suffering on the new business side. A down quarter compared to statistics, if you consistently renew at 104% or have NRR at 104% and you come in at 80, that can be catastrophic. And I really like your point that revenue operations is very well positioned to figure out where the sticking points and issues are. Sorry, Nick, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the mindset comes from what is the point of acquiring a customer if you're going to lose him at the point of renewal, right? It's
Yep.
massive effort, massive amount of cost that goes with acquiring that customer acquisition cost number, which is also something the board is always asking for, if you're going to lose it later, right? So it actually says, okay, this is a full success story. I acquired that customer and I managed to maintain that customer and sometimes even increase the contract. What did we do there? And those talking points will feed back into, we need to actually do a lot more of that because the customer is actually happy with this. And this drives marketing communications. This drives everything, the demos we do, everything.
Yeah, it can totally change how you think about ideal customer profile and discovering an unacceptable profile even, and figuring out what you no longer want to market to, because that's where your turn is. Great
And
points.
not just go based on titles, right? Which is not what ICP is.
No, it's really not. Well, thank you both. Are there any other thoughts you want to leave with folks before we hit the end button?
I'll just throw one last thing out there is, we've all been talking about NRR, GRR, customer acquisition costs. There is a new thing that we need to start thinking about as RevOps leaders, which is the customer retention cost, right? If we want to continue growing that, we want to scale our organization, and scale is the most important thing right now, right? What does it cost to retain a customer? And that's really going to help you think about how do you budget and strategize going into the next year? And then what processes and workflows do you need to deploy to the org to really track that and manage that correctly?
Oh, and proper capacity planning. I just love it. Great.
Oh yeah, and that ultimately ties into the old saying that it's cheaper to retain a customer than acquiring a new one. And that's a fact.
Well, thank you both. This has been wonderful. As David mentioned in the chat, we are going to send the recording and write up to everybody who's here. And thank you again for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.